My name is Claire Whitford, and for most of my life, my family thought I was too quiet to understand what was happening around me. They were wrong. I understood more than they ever knew. I understood the way my father stopped listening to people the moment they stopped sounding useful. I understood the way my sisters smiled at me in public and corrected me in private. I understood that in my family, silence was not treated as thoughtfulness. It was treated as absence. And because I had inattentive ADHD, that silence became proof of everything they already wanted to believe. That I was scattered, that I was slow to respond, that I had no presence, that I could not be trusted with anything serious. My father used to say it gently, which somehow made it worse. Claire has a kind heart, he would tell people, but she gets overwhelmed. She is not built for leadership. Every time he said it, people nodded like he had just described the weather. Nobody asked me. Nobody wondered whether I was overwhelmed because I did not understand the room, or because I understood too much of it at once. My sister Vivian was different. Vivian knew how to enter a room like she had already been introduced by God. She was polished, beautiful, and terrifyingly good at making powerful people feel comfortable. She went to the right schools, wore the right clothes, laughed at the right jokes, and spoke in sentences that sounded like they belonged in investor reports. My father adored that. He called it discipline. He called it executive presence. He called it the future of Whitford Urban Holdings. The company had been founded by my grandmother, Eleanor Whitford, in 1965, back when women in commercial real estate were treated like secretaries even when they owned the building. She started with one neglected property in Brooklyn and turned it into a real estate company with apartment buildings, mixed-use developments, office spaces, and enough political connections to make men twice her size lower their voices when she entered a room. My father inherited the company. He liked to say he had built on her legacy, but that was not quite true. Grandma Eleanor built the foundation. My father built a stage on top of it and taught everyone to applaud when he walked across it. By the time I was 29, Vivian was being prepared to take over as CEO. Everyone knew it. The board knew it. Investors knew it. My parents' friends knew it. Even the staff knew it, although nobody said it too loudly around me. I was given a desk on the 31st floor, far from the executive offices, in a department my father liked to describe as community relations. That sounded nicer than what it really was. Complaints. Tenant complaints, maintenance complaints, neighborhood complaints, angry calls from residents whose elevators had been broken for 3 weeks. Small business owners whose leases had been changed without warning. Local council members asking why our construction sites kept ignoring noise limits. I was the person they sent people to when nobody important wanted to listen. My father thought it was the perfect place for me. "Claire is good with feelings," he said once during a staff lunch, smiling like it was a compliment. "Let her handle the emotional side." Vivian laughed softly into her water glass. I remember that because she did not laugh loudly. Vivian was too trained for that. She laughed just enough for me to hear it. For 2 years, I sat in that little office and listened. I listened to tenants who were not trying to be difficult, just tired. I listened to building managers who were one resignation away from walking out. I listened to contractors who warned us that cheap repairs would cost more later. I listened to receptionists, maintenance workers, leasing assistants, junior analysts, and old women in rent-stabilized apartments who knew more about our buildings than half the people in the boardroom. And because my mind never moved in straight lines, I started connecting things. A missed repair request in Queens, a legal notice in Brooklyn, a contractor quitting on a Tuesday, a tenant organizer calling 3 days later, a city inspector asking a question nobody upstairs wanted to answer. To my father, they were separate problems. To Vivian, they were noise. To me, they were a map. I kept notes nobody knew about. Not neat notes, not the kind Vivian would approve of. Mine were color-coded, cross-referenced, covered in arrows and dates and names. I taped timelines to my apartment wall. I built spreadsheets that looked chaotic until you followed the colors. I recorded patterns in the way people complained, not just what they complained about. There was a project called Harbor Point, a luxury redevelopment my father loved because investors loved it. He called it the crown jewel of our next decade. I called it a lawsuit waiting for a headline. The building was half occupied by long-term tenants, many of them elderly, many of them living on fixed incomes. The redevelopment plan would not technically evict them, but it would raise pressure in every possible legal way. Construction noise, delayed repairs, buyout offers, shifting lease terms, endless inconvenience wrapped in polite language. I saw the complaints before anyone else connected them. I wrote a report, 37 pages. Not emotional, not dramatic, just facts, timelines, risks, dates, and the likely public fallouts if the company kept pretending people were obstacles instead of human beings. I sent it to my father. His assistant replied 6 days later, "Gerald has received your memo. He appreciates your passion." Passion, that was the word they used when they wanted to ignore a woman without sounding rude. 2 weeks later, I found my report printed in Vivian's office with a sticky note on top. "Can we make this less hysterical?" I did not cry at work. I waited until I got home. The only person who had ever understood the way my mind worked was my grandmother. Grandma Eleanor had never been officially diagnosed with ADHD. Women of her generation rarely were. They were called difficult, scattered, intense, dramatic, impossible. She told me once that when she was young, her father used to snap his fingers in front of her face and say, "Eleanor, come back to Earth." She said the funny thing was she had never been away from Earth. She had been watching it too closely. When I was 11 and a school psychologist finally said inattentive ADHD, my parents treated it like an explanation for disappointment. Grandma treated it like a translation. A week after my diagnosis, she invited me to her apartment on the Upper West Side. I remember sitting at her kitchen table while she poured tea into cups so thin I was afraid to touch them. My parents had told her I was struggling to focus. She asked to see my notebook. I hesitated because my notebook looked nothing like Vivian's. Vivian had perfect outlines. Mine had boxes, loops, arrows, drawings, half sentences, and stars beside things that seemed unrelated until I explained them. Grandma studied it for almost 10 minutes. Then she said, "This is not disorder." I looked down at my hands. It looks messy. To people who only know one kind of order. That was the first time anyone had said something like that to me. She tapped one of my arrows with her finger. "Your father thinks you drift because you cannot focus. I think you drift because your mind catches things his misses." I did not know what to say. She smiled. "Your mind does not move in straight lines, Claire. Neither did mine." After that, I went to her apartment every Sunday. She taught me business the way nobody else had patience to teach me. Not through textbooks or perfect lectures. She taught me through buildings, people, weather, timing, fear, ego, and pressure. She would spread old contracts across her dining table and ask me what was missing. Not what the words said, what was missing. At first, I did not understand. Then I started to see it. A clause that protected the investor but not the tenant. A maintenance obligation with no deadline. A partnership agreement where one man got authority without accountability. Grandma would watch me, eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. "Your father reads documents like a man looking for a door he can lock behind him," she once said. "You read them like someone asking, 'Who gets trapped inside?'" That was the highest compliment she ever gave me. When she got sick, I visited more often. Vivian came twice, both times with flowers and a photographer's smile. My father came when he had to. My mother complained that hospitals smelled depressing. I was there the evening Grandma asked everyone else to leave the room. She was 86 then, thin as paper, but her eyes had not softened. They were still the eyes of a woman who had survived rooms built to exclude her. "Claire," she said, "your father will never hand you a chair at the table." "I know, no," she said. "You think you know one day he will make it impossible for you to pretend you still have a place in this family business. When that happens, do not beg, do not explain, do not shrink." Her hand closed around mine. Listen to what? To the person I left behind to speak for me. I thought she meant a lawyer. I was partly right. Grandma died 6 weeks later, after the funeral. My father gave a beautiful speech about legacy. Vivian cried delicately in the front row. I sat 3 seats away from them and wondered if either of them knew what Grandma's hand had felt like in mine when she told me not to shrink. For 3 years, nothing obvious happened. Vivian rose through the company like she was being pulled upward by invisible wires. Vice President of Strategy, then Executive Vice President, then Acting Chief Development Officer. Every title sounded more inevitable than the last. I stayed in community relations. My father said I was valuable there. Vivian said I had found my lane. My mother said I should be grateful because a lot of people with my limitations would not have a family company willing to employ them. Limitations, that word followed me like a perfume I hated. Then came the Whitford Founders Gala, 60 years of Whitford Urban Holdings. The event was held in the ballroom of a Manhattan hotel my father had renovated and never stopped bragging about. There were investors, board members, city officials, family friends, journalists, and enough champagne to make bad decisions look elegant. On the wall behind the stage hung a massive portrait of Grandma Eleanor, younger than I had ever known her, standing in front of her first Brooklyn building with one hand on her hip and the expression of a woman daring the world to underestimate her. I stood near the back of the room in a navy dress I had bought on sale and ironed twice. Vivian stood near the stage in ivory silk, laughing with 2 board members and a city councilman who had ignored 3 of my emails about Harbor Point. My mother found me by the service doors. "There you are," she said, looking me up and down. "Try not to disappear tonight." I wasn't planning to disappear. Good. Your father wants everything to look united. That meant Vivian was being announced. I knew it before the speeches started. At 8:30, my father walked onto the stage. Gerald Whitford was handsome in the way rich men often are, well-tailored enough that people mistake grooming for character. He stood beneath Grandma's portrait and talked about legacy, vision, growth, and the future. Then he called Vivian up beside him. The applause was immediate. My sister crossed the stage with perfect humility, the kind that had clearly been practiced. My father kissed her cheek and turned back to the room. "Tonight," he said, "I am proud to announce that Vivian Whitford will begin the formal transition process to become the next CEO of Whitford Urban Holdings." The room erupted. People stood, glasses lifted, cameras flashed. I clapped because everyone was looking, and because part of me had been trained so deeply that even pain knew how to behave. Then my father raised a hand for quiet. "And of course," he continued, "this company has room for every kind of contribution." My stomach tightened. "I knew that tone, Claire," he said, looking toward the back of the room, "has always had a gift for listening. She is not someone who seeks the spotlight, and leadership requires focus, presence, and discipline." A few people chuckled politely. My face went hot. That is why Claire will continue serving in the area best suited to her strengths, community concerns, tenant feelings. The human side of our work, tenant feelings. He smiled at me like he had just been generous. "Vivian will lead us forward. Claire will help us remember to be kind along the way." The applause came again. Softer this time, unsure in places, but still there. I stood under the sound of it and felt 29 years of being translated incorrectly. Kind, quiet, soft, limited. I looked at Vivian. She did not look sorry. She looked relieved. Then, from the front row, an older woman stood. Margaret Hale. I knew her name before I knew her face. Grandma's former legal counsel, her closest advisor. A woman my father had pushed off the board 2 years after Grandma died, calling it modernization. Margaret was 73, silver-haired, straight-backed, and calm in a way that made the people around her seem suddenly overdressed. My father's smile froze. "Margaret," he said into the microphone, "how nice to see you." She did not smile back. "Gerald," she said, her voice carrying without a microphone. Eleanor instructed me to deliver something if you ever publicly removed Claire from the line of leadership. The room went quiet so quickly I could hear the ice settle in someone's glass. My father lowered the microphone. "This is not the time." Margaret looked up at him. "That is exactly what Eleanor said you would say." I stopped breathing. Vivian turned toward my father. My mother appeared at my side and gripped my wrist hard enough to hurt. "Do not make this about you," she whispered. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at Margaret Hale standing beneath my grandmother's portrait with a cream folder in her hand for the first time that night. I understood what Grandma had meant. Listen to the person I left behind to speak for me. And this time I did not shrink. Margaret Hale walked toward the stage with the kind of calm that makes powerful people nervous. My father stepped away from the microphone and lowered his voice, but everyone in the first 3 rows could still hear him. "Margaret, whatever you think you're doing, this can wait." "No," she said. It waited exactly as long as Eleanor wanted it to wait. Vivian was still standing beside him, her smile gone stiff. My mother's hand tightened around my wrist again. And this time, I pulled away. She looked at me like I had slapped her. I had not. I had simply moved my own arm. Margaret reached the stage and handed my father a cream folder sealed with my grandmother's initials. He did not take it. "Open it," Margaret said. He laughed once sharply. "I will not let you turn my mother's legacy gala into some personal stunt." Margaret turned slightly toward the room. "Then I will be clear, for the record. Eleanor Whitford created a founders voting trust in 2021. 6 months before her death, I am the trustee. The trust contains a directive that activates under one specific condition." The room was so quiet now that even the waiters had stopped moving. My father's face changed. It was not fear yet. It was the recognition of a locked door he had not known existed. Margaret continued. "If Gerald Whitford publicly removed Claire Whitford from the line of leadership, or publicly declared her unfit to lead the company, I was instructed to release Eleanor's final voting directive." Vivian's head turned toward him. My father said, "That is ridiculous." Margaret looked at him over the top of the folder. "You just did it." The words landed like a glass breaking. My mother whispered, "Oh my God." My father grabbed the microphone again, which was his first mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding. Claire has never been in the line of leadership." Margaret did not flinch. "That is exactly the misunderstanding Eleanor expected you to reveal." A low murmur moved through the ballroom. I stood near the back, frozen in my navy dress, while strangers began turning to look at me. Investors, family friends, people who had never learned my name unless it was printed on a seating chart. All suddenly curious about the quiet daughter. My father saw the room shifting and tried to recover. My mother was elderly when she signed anything Margaret is referring to. She was evaluated by 2 independent physicians, Margaret said, both confirmed full capacity. The trust was drafted by Morrison, Hale, and Burke, reviewed by separate counsel, and notarized with video record. You had no authority to hide this from me. I had every authority. Eleanor gave it to me. Vivian stepped forward then. "What does the directive say?" Her voice was calm, but I knew my sister. The calm was a dress she had put on quickly. Margaret opened the folder. Under the terms of the Founders Voting Trust, Eleanor Whitford's remaining founders' shares and voting authority transfer to Claire Whitford immediately upon activation. That gives Claire 51% voting control over Whitford Urban Holdings, along with the founders' board seat and the right to call an emergency board review. The ballroom erupted into whispers. My father stared at Margaret. Vivian stared at me. My mother looked like the floor had moved under her shoes. I did not feel powerful. I felt like someone had opened a door behind me and I was afraid to turn around. Margaret lifted one more page from the folder. "There is also a letter," my father said. "No," Margaret read anyway. "My dear Claire, if you are hearing this in a room full of people, Then your father has finally mistaken your quiet for consent one time too many. My throat tightened. I could almost hear Grandma's voice. He believes leadership belongs to the person who speaks first, speaks loudest, and makes the room believe certainty is the same thing as truth. I built this company by listening to what men like him ignored. Vivian looked down. Margaret kept reading. Claire is not empty. She is not slow. She is not weak. Her mind does not move in straight lines, and neither did mine. That is why she sees what others miss. My father's jaw flexed. She has spent years being sent the problems no one wanted to hear, and she listened. A company that stops listening becomes a building with its lights still on, and no one safe inside. The room had gone very still again. Gerald, if you are angry, be angry at yourself. I did not set this trap for you. I left a door unlocked, and I trusted your pride to walk through it. That was my grandmother. Even dead, she could still make a room behave. Margaret lowered the letter for the avoidance of confusion. This directive takes effect immediately. A formal emergency board review has already been scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. My father laughed, but there was no strength in it. You scheduled a board meeting before this even happened? Margaret closed the folder. Eleanor scheduled the possibility 3 years ago. You supplied the occasion tonight. For a second, nobody moved. Then my father turned toward me. I had seen him angry before. I had seen him cold. I had seen him disappointed in ways that made me feel like a child again. But I had never seen him look at me as if I were dangerous. Claire, he said, no microphone now. Come here. It was not an invitation. It was the voice he used with assistants, contractors, drivers, anyone he expected to obey before they thought. I walked forward, slowly. Every step felt longer than it should have. When I reached the front of the room, Vivian leaned toward me. Do you have any idea what you are doing? I looked at her. No, I said, but I know what he was doing. Her face tightened. My father stepped down from the stage and took my elbow, not hard enough for people to react, but hard enough to remind me he still thought he could move me. Margaret's voice cut through. Remove your hand from the majority voting shareholder. The words sounded absurd. They also worked. My father let go. I looked at the spot where his fingers had been and realized I was shaking. Margaret handed me the folder. It was heavier than it looked. The board will expect you tomorrow, she said quietly. You do not have to decide everything tonight. Eleanor only wanted you to have the chair that was already yours. My mother appeared beside me, pale and furious. Claire, you need to think very carefully. This family has protected you your entire life. I almost laughed. Protected me. That was what they called it when they lowered the ceiling and told me it was shelter. No, I said, you protected the story that I could not handle more. My mother's eyes filled immediately. She was very good at tears that arrived on command. This is not you. That one almost got me for years. That sentence had been how she pulled me back into the role they preferred. If I spoke too firmly, it was not me. If I refused something, it was not me. If I wanted more, it was not me. I looked at the portrait of my grandmother above the stage. Maybe it is, I said. The gala did not recover after that. People stayed because rich people hate leaving before they know what happened. But the celebration was dead. Vivian disappeared with 2 board members. My father spent 20 minutes in a corner on the phone, speaking so quietly that his face did the yelling for him. My mother told relatives I was overwhelmed and being manipulated by Margaret. For once, nobody seemed eager to believe her immediately. I left before dessert. Margaret walked me to the car. On the sidewalk outside the hotel, Manhattan looked exactly the same as it had before, which felt insulting. The taxis still honked. People still laughed outside bars. Steam still rose from a street grate, like the city had not just split my life in half. Margaret stood beside me with her hands folded over her cane. Your grandmother wanted to be here herself, she said. She hated the idea of leaving you alone in the room. Then why did she make it happen this way? Because she knew you would never take power if she simply offered it to you. I looked at the folder in my hands. She was probably right, she usually was. The next morning, I arrived at Whitford Tower at 9:30. I wore the same navy dress because I had not slept enough to care. I tied my hair back, carried Grandma's folder in one hand and my own battered laptop bag in the other. Security let me through without asking for my badge. That was new. The boardroom sat on the 42nd floor. All glass and walnut and expensive silence. My father was already there. Seated at the head of the table, Vivian sat to his right in a gray suit, perfectly composed again. My mother was not there. This was not her kind of battlefield. Margaret sat near the middle of the table. 3 board members I recognized from company events avoided my eyes. 2 others looked curious. One, a woman named Anita Rao, who had run commercial operations before my father pushed her into an advisory role, gave me a small nod. Robert Lang, the board chair, called the meeting to order. We are here to address the activation of the Eleanor Whitford founders, voting trust, and the leadership implications for Whitford Urban Holdings. My father spoke before Robert finished sitting. I want it entered into the record that I believe this process is irregular, disruptive, and damaging to the company. Robert looked tired already. Entered. Vivian folded her hands on the table. I would also like it entered that Claire has no executive training, no development background, and no experience managing assets at this level. I expected that. Still, hearing it in her polished voice stung. My father added, "She works in tenant complaints, community relations," Margaret said. "Tenant complaints," he repeated, "because that is the level she can manage." I looked at him. For a moment I was 12 again, sitting at a dining table while adults discussed me like I was a weather problem. Then I opened my laptop. "I brought something," I said. Vivian sighed. "Claire, this is not the time for one of your color-coded projects." Several board members glanced at each other. My father leaned back. "Let her speak. It may help everyone understand the situation." He thought I was going to embarrass myself. That was the advantage of being underestimated by people who never updated their opinions. I connected my laptop to the screen at the end of the room. The first slide appeared. Harbor Point Risk Map. Vivian's expression shifted just slightly. My father noticed too. "What is this?" he asked. "A summary of the complaints, maintenance delays, legal notices, tenant communications, contractor warnings, staff turnover, and public exposure risk connected to the Harbor Point redevelopment." "Harbor Point is not on today's agenda. It should be," Vivian said. "This is exactly what I mean, Claire. You cannot just bring random tenant noise into a governance meeting. It is not random." I clicked to the next slide. A timeline appeared, 12 months of color-coded entries connected by lines. Blue for maintenance, red for legal exposure, yellow for tenant organizing, purple for city council attention, green for investor sensitivity. I heard Anita Rao and Hale. I kept going. In January, building management delayed elevator repairs in Tower C for 17 days. In February, 12 elderly tenants filed written complaints. In March, a local tenant advocate began collecting statements. In April, our construction contractor warned that the noise schedule violated 2 city agreements. In May, 3 staff members resigned from Harbor Point operations within the same week. I clicked again. By June, the complaints were no longer about inconvenience. They were about constructive displacement. Robert leaned forward. "Are you saying the company is creating conditions that could be interpreted as forced removal?" "I am saying a plaintiff's attorney could argue that. I'm also saying the local council member has already asked for inspection records twice." My father's voice sharpened. "Why was this not escalated?" I looked at him. "It was. I sent you a 37-page report 8 weeks ago," Vivian said. The report was emotional and speculative. I clicked again. The screen showed a scan of her sticky note. "Can we make this less hysterical?" The room went silent. Vivian's face flushed. "I did not authorize you to copy materials from my office. You printed my report and left it face up beside the investor packet for Harbor Point." Anita Rao turned to Vivian. "You saw this and did not escalate it?" Vivian said. It was an unvetted internal memo. I clicked again. A city council letter appeared on the screen. 3 days after that, the city requested a compliance meeting. It is scheduled for next Thursday. If we attend that meeting pretending this is just tenant noise, we will walk into a public relations disaster with legal exposure attached. Nobody spoke. For the first time in my life, a room full of executives waited for me to continue, so I did. I showed them the maintenance delays, the ignored contractor warnings, the tenants whose buyout offers had been timed around medical disruptions, the staff complaints about being pressured to avoid written records. I did not exaggerate. I did not cry. I did not accuse anyone of evil motives. I simply connected the pieces. At the end, I said, my recommendation is not to cancel Harbor Point. It is to pause the displacement strategy, repair the documented maintenance failures, meet with tenant representatives before the city forces us to, and commission an independent review before investors learn about this from a headline. My father looked furious. Vivian looked worse. Robert Lang removed his glasses. How long have you been tracking this? 14 months. Margaret's mouth curved slightly, but she said nothing. Vivian found her voice. 14 months and you said nothing? I stared at her. I said it in reports you did not read, emails you did not answer, meetings I was not invited to, and memos you called hysterical. That landed. Not loudly, but it landed. My father pushed back from the table. This is not governance. This is an ambush. No, Anita Rouse said. This is governance. It is just coming from someone you trained us not to hear. My father turned on her. Anita. Do not Anita me, she said. I have been asking for an operational risk review for 2 years. Robert looked around the table. It appears we have 2 matters. First, the voting trust. Second, Harbor Point. I have a motion, I said. Everyone looked at me, even Vivian. My voice shook at first, but it steadied as I went. I am not asking to become CEO. I am not qualified for that today, and I will not pretend otherwise just because my father taught this family that power means taking the biggest chair as fast as possible. My father's face darkened, but he stayed silent. I am asking for 3 things. First, that Vivian's transition to CEO be paused, pending an independent leadership and operations review. Second, that Harbor Point redevelopment strategy be suspended for 30 days while tenant, maintenance, and legal risks are reviewed. Third, that Gerald Whitford's unilateral authority over redevelopment decisions be temporarily limited during that review. The room held its breath. Vivian stared at me like she had never seen me before. My father said, "You are trying to remove me." "No," I said. "I am trying to stop you from treating a company Grandma built like a throne." Robert Lang looked at Margaret. Margaret said, as the majority voting shareholder, "Claire has the right to bring the motion." Anita seconded it before anyone could hesitate. The vote took less than 5 minutes. 4 voted with my father. 6 voted for the motion. 1 abstained. Margaret voted last for Eleanor. She said, "The motion carried." My father did not explode. That almost would have been easier. He sat very still, both hands on the table, staring at the screen where my risk map was still visible. I watched him read it, really read it, and for 1 second I wondered if he understood that I had not made any of it to hurt him. Then he looked at me. "You have no idea what you have done." I closed my laptop. "I think I do." Vivian stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "You humiliated us." I turned to her. "Last night, Dad told a ballroom full of people that I was not fit to lead because I was too quiet, too unfocused, and better suited to handling feelings. Today I showed the board a risk you ignored because it came from me." "So no, Vivian, I did not humiliate you. I interrupted the version of me that made you comfortable." She looked like she wanted to say something cruel. Instead, she left. My father followed a minute later. The room emptied slowly after that. Board members who had ignored me for years suddenly wanted to shake my hand. Robert said we would need to discuss my role. Anita said my report might have saved the company from a public scandal. Margaret simply waited by the door. When everyone else was gone, she came to stand beside me. You did well. I almost threw up twice. Your grandmother threw up before her first investor meeting. I looked at her. She did? In a potted plant outside the conference room for the first time in 2 days. I laughed. Margaret smiled. Then she walked in and convinced 3 men to give her money for a building they did not believe she could manage. That sounded like Grandma. What happens now? I asked. Now they try to make you feel guilty for using the power they never expected you to have. And after that? After that, you decide what kind of woman you want to be with it. The Harbor Point review began the next week. It was worse than even I had thought. Not criminal, not exactly, but careless in the way powerful people become careless when every inconvenience has a lawyer attached to it. Repairs had been delayed because vacant units were more profitable. Buyout offers had been timed around pressure points. Staff had been told to keep certain conversations off email. The independent report did not use the word cruelty. It did not need to. 3 weeks later, my father resigned as CEO. Officially, it was for health and family reasons. The press release thanked him for years of leadership and promised a new chapter grounded in accountability and community trust. My mother called the press release dignified. Margaret called it generous. I called it short. Vivian did not become CEO, at least not then. The board appointed Anita Rao as interim CEO, which made my father furious and made more sense than anything he had planned. Anita knew operations. She knew buildings. She knew how to listen without calling it weakness. Vivian stayed with the company, but for the first time in her life, she had to earn a room that had always been opened for her in advance. She did not speak to me for almost 2 months. When she finally did, it was in the lobby of Whitford Tower after a meeting. I used to think you were lucky, she said. That was not what I expected. Lucky? She looked at the marble floor. Nobody expected anything from you. I almost laughed. But her face stopped me. Vivian looked tired. Not messy, not broken, just tired in a way her makeup could not solve. They expected everything from me, she said, and I let them turn that into a reason to treat you like you were nothing. I did not rush to comfort her. The old Claire might have. This Claire waited. Vivian swallowed. I'm sorry, it was not enough, but it was the first honest thing she had given me in years. I believe you, I said. I just do not know what to do with it yet. She nodded. That is fair. My father did not apologize. Not then. Maybe not ever. He sent one email, 3 paragraphs long, explaining that leadership required hard choices and that I would understand that eventually. It was not an apology. It was a man trying to rewrite defeat as wisdom. I did not answer. My mother called twice and left messages about family healing, by which she meant I should make my father feel less embarrassed. I did not answer those either. I had spent 29 years being available for other people's discomfort. I was learning availability is not the same thing as love. 6 months after the gala, I moved into Grandma's old office. Not permanently. I was not CEO. I was not pretending to be ready for a job I had never been trained to hold. My title was Founder's Representative and Director of Community Risk, which sounded strange until people realized it came with voting power. I kept my old color-coded maps. The first thing I did was create a tenant advisory council for Harbor Point. The second was hire 2 full-time maintenance compliance officers. The third was make sure every executive had to spend 1 day a quarter answering community calls without assistants filtering the anger out first. Vivian lasted 40 minutes on her first call day before asking if people were always that upset. I told her yes. Then I told her they had reasons. The board started listening to reports from my department, not because they had suddenly become kinder people, but because my department had saved them money, lawsuits, and headlines. I learned that sometimes the fastest way to make powerful people respect care is to show them how expensive it becomes when they ignore it. I wish Grandma had lived to see it. 3 months after I moved into Grandma's old office, Margaret brought me a box from storage. It was not large, brown cardboard, taped twice, with Eleanor Whitford written across the top in black marker. "I found this when we were clearing the archive room," she said. "I think she meant for you to have it eventually." I waited until everyone left before I opened it. Inside were old notebooks, not legal files, not contracts, not financial ledgers, notebooks, Grandma's notebooks. The first one was from 1968. The cover was cracked at the spine, the pages yellowed at the edges. When I opened it, I expected neat business notes, maybe meeting summaries or property lists. Instead, I found arrows, circles, names connected to other names, half-written observations in the margins, a building address beside a tenant's complaint, beside a banker's comment, beside a weather report from the day a roof leaked. It looked like my wall. It looked like my brain for a long time. I just sat there with that notebook open on my desk, one hand over my mouth, trying not to cry. All my life, I had thought I was inventing ways to survive a mind nobody understood. But Grandma had been doing the same thing before I was born, before there were words in our family for what we were, before anyone cared why a woman might notice everything and still be told she was too much. On the inside cover, she had written one sentence in blue ink: "The men in the room will call it chaos until it makes them money." I laughed then, a real laugh. Then I cried anyway. That night, I took the notebook home and read it in bed, slowly, page by page, not because I had to work hard to understand it, but because every page felt like someone reaching back through time and putting a hand on my shoulder. There were notes about contractors who lied with perfect smiles, notes about city inspectors who asked soft questions when they meant hard ones, notes about tenants who predicted problems months before engineers admitted they existed. And between all of it, little comments that sounded so much like Grandma, I could hear her voice. "People tell you who they are when they think you are not important enough to impress. Watch who interrupts the quietest person in the room. A company does not collapse all at once. It whispers first." I understood then why she had trusted me. Not because I was special in the way my family used that word. Not because I was secretly perfect. Not because I had been chosen by some dramatic twist of fate. She trusted me because she recognized the way I listened. She knew what it cost to be dismissed by people who benefited from your silence. She also knew the cost of staying silent forever. A week later, I framed one page from her notebook and hung it in my office, right beside the window. It was not a page about money. It was not a page about a famous deal, or a powerful man, or a building that made the family rich. It was a page about a woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived in one of Grandma's first buildings in Brooklyn. Mrs. Alvarez had complained for months that the back stairwell smelled like gas. The building manager dismissed her. The contractor dismissed her. Everyone said she was old, nervous, dramatic. Grandma listened. She sent someone to check. They found a leak. That page ended with one sentence: she was not dramatic. She was early. I thought about that sentence more than anything because that was what my family had never understood about me. I was not overreacting when I noticed discomfort before other people named it. I was not scattered when I connected problems they preferred to keep separate. I was not weak because other people's pain reached me before it reached them. Sometimes I was simply early. The company changed slowly after that. Not in a montage, not in some perfect transformation where everyone suddenly became better people because I gave one speech in a boardroom. Real change is slower and less cinematic than people want it to be. Some executives hated the new rules. Some property managers resented my department. Some board members still spoke to Vivian first, even when I was the one with voting control, but they stopped laughing at my maps. That was the beginning. At the next quarterly meeting, I presented the Harbor Point recovery plan, repairs completed, tenant council formed. City inspection passed, 2 potential lawsuits avoided, investor confidence stabilized. When I finished, Robert Lang said, "Excellent work, Claire, just that. No fireworks. No standing ovation, but nobody added, considering your limitations. Nobody said, for someone like you." Nobody looked at Vivian to translate what I had meant. They just accepted the work. I went back to my office afterward, closed the door, and let myself feel the strange quiet of being taken seriously. It was not joy, exactly. It was grief and relief sitting beside each other. Because when people finally treat you like you are capable, part of you is grateful. And another part of you mourns every year you spent begging for something that should have been ordinary. Vivian knocked on my door that afternoon. She stood there holding 2 coffees. "I didn't know what you drank," she said. "Then how did you buy it?" I guessed. I looked at the cup. Black coffee, not even close. I took it anyway. She stepped inside but did not sit until I nodded toward the chair. That was new. Vivian had spent her whole life entering rooms like every chair in them had been waiting for her. "I saw the Harbor Point report," she said. "I assumed you would. It was good. I waited." She looked down at her coffee. "It was better than good. It was the kind of thing I should have taken seriously the first time." There was no easy answer to that, so I did not give her one. She sat with the silence for once. Then she said, "When Dad called you soft, I believed him because I needed him to be right about you." That surprised me. Why? "Because if he was wrong about you, then maybe he was wrong about me too." She laughed once, but it broke halfway through. "I spent my whole life trying to become the daughter he could brag about. I thought that meant I was winning, but after the gala, after the board meeting, I realized something awful." "What?" "I don't know who I am when nobody is clapping." For the first time in years, I saw her as a person instead of a polished weapon my father had sharpened and pointed at me. That did not erase what she had done. It did not undo the laughs, the little corrections, the years of leaving me alone at the edge of the family while she stood in the center and pretended not to see me. But it made her human. "I don't know what we're supposed to be now," she said. "Maybe we stop trying to be what Dad assigned us." She nodded, slowly. "The future CEO and the fragile one, the impressive one, and the difficult one. The daughter he trusted and the daughter Grandma did." Vivian looked at me then. "She was right to trust you." I had waited most of my life to hear something like that from my sister. When it finally came, it did not fix everything, but it did land somewhere. "Thank you," I said. My father stayed away from the office for 2 months after his resignation became official. When he finally came in to clear out the last things from his executive suite, I saw him in the hallway outside Grandma's old office. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked smaller without the office behind him. Or maybe I had finally stopped shrinking. His eyes moved past me to the framed notebook page on my wall. "Your grandmother kept strange records," he said. I looked back at the page. She kept useful records. He gave a short, bitter smile. "You sound like her." I know, that seemed to hurt him. Good, I thought. And then I hated that. I thought it. And then I let myself think it anyway. He cleared his throat. "I still think Margaret manipulated the situation." "No, Dad." "She followed instructions from a woman who was angry with me. From a woman who knew you." His face hardened. There he was again. The man who could turn shame into anger faster than most people could blink. "I gave you a job, you gave me a corner, and called it gratitude. You were not ready for more. You never checked." He opened his mouth, then closed it. That silence was the closest he had ever come to hearing me. I did not push for more. I had learned something by then. Not every silence is defeat. Sometimes silence is the sound of a person running out of lies they can say out loud. He left with 2 boxes and no apology. I thought it would crush me. It did not. That was when I knew I had changed. A year earlier, I would have replayed that conversation all night, searching for the sentence that might have made him understand me. I would have blamed my tone, my timing, my face, my body language. I would have wondered if I sounded too emotional or not emotional enough. That day, I went back into my office and answered an email about elevator repairs. Life continued. That was the real victory, not the shares, not the board vote, not the way people whispered when my father walked out. The real victory was discovering that my father could leave without taking the floor out from under me. 1 year after the gala, I stood in the lobby of Harbor Point on a rainy Thursday morning while the first tenant council meeting was being held in the renovated community room. The building looked different now, not perfect. I do not believe in perfect buildings any more than I believe in perfect families. But the elevators worked, the hallways had new lighting, the construction schedule was posted where residents could actually see it. Maintenance requests had tracking numbers, buyout offers had oversight. No one was allowed to pressure tenants through neglect and call it redevelopment. There were women in that room with folders full of old emails. Men with questions written on legal pads, small business owners who wanted to know whether their leases would survive the next phase. People my father would have called difficult, people my grandmother would have called early. I stood at the back and listened while Anita answered questions. She did not always have perfect answers, but she did not hide behind language either. When a tenant asked why it had taken so long for the company to care, Anita looked at me for half a second, then said, "Because we were wrong about what counted as important." That sentence traveled through the room quietly. No one applauded. People who have been ignored for too long do not clap the first time someone admits it. They wait to see whether the admission comes with repair. I respected that. After the meeting, an older man with a cane stopped me by the door. "You're the Whitford granddaughter," he said. "I am. Which one?" I almost smiled. For most of my life, that question would have meant Vivian. That day, it simply meant there were two of us, Claire, I said. He nodded slowly. "My wife wrote to your department 6 times about the heat last winter. I remember." He looked surprised. I did remember. Apartment 8C. 3 heat complaints, 2 after-hours calls. 1 handwritten letter because his wife did not trust the online form. She said no one ever listens until something breaks. He said she was right. He studied me for a moment, then gave 1 sharp nod and walked away. That was all. No thank you, no forgiveness, no happy ending tied with a ribbon. Just one man deciding, maybe, to wait and see. I took that seriously. On the drive back to the office, I thought about how different that felt from the kind of approval I used to chase. My family's approval had always been bright and temporary, like stage light. If you stood in the right place, smiled the right way, performed the right role, you might feel warm for a second, then the light moved. What I wanted now was different. Trust. Trust was slower, harder, less glamorous. It did not arrive because someone made a speech, or inherited shares, or exposed a lie in a boardroom. Trust had to be rebuilt in repairs, returned phone calls, honest minutes, and decisions that cost money because people mattered more than pretending everything was fine. That became my work, not proving my father wrong every day, not competing with Vivian, not trying to become some flawless version of a woman who never forgot anything, never paused too long, never got overwhelmed by noise or fluorescent lights or 6 people speaking over each other in a meeting. My work was learning how to lead as myself. That meant I changed the rooms I entered. I asked for agendas ahead of time. I brought printed maps. I made people stop interrupting junior staff. I let silence sit after questions instead of rushing to fill it. I started meetings with the sentence Grandma once said to me at her kitchen table: "Fast answers are not always better answers." At first, people smiled politely. Then they learned I meant it. One afternoon, a junior analyst named Priya came to my office with a folder clutched to her chest. She was young, maybe 24. With anxious eyes and a voice that kept shrinking every time someone spoke over her in meetings. "I noticed something," she said. Then she immediately added, "It might be nothing." I pointed to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down," she did. And for the next 20 minutes, she explained a pattern in maintenance spending across 3 buildings that suggested one contractor had been overbilling us for months. Her evidence was scattered, half-finished, and full of nervous apologies. It was also correct. When she was done, she looked at me like she expected me to be annoyed. I thought of Grandma. I thought of my notebook at 11. I thought of every adult who had looked at the way I processed information and mistaken unfamiliarity for failure. Then I said, "This is good work." Priya blinked. "Really?" "Really. Now let's make sure they can't ignore it." We brought it to Anita the next day. The contractor was investigated. The company recovered almost $700,000 in improper charges. At the next board meeting, Robert praised the operations team. I interrupted him. Priya found it. The room turned toward her. Her face went red. Her hands twisted in her lap for a second. I worried she would hate me for putting attention on her. Then she sat a little straighter. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did. That was the first time I understood what Grandma had really left me." Power was not just the ability to speak. It was the ability to make room for someone else's truth before the room buried it. I started doing that on purpose. Not perfectly. I made mistakes. I overcorrected sometimes. I trusted people who were not ready. I doubted myself when old voices got loud in my head. There were nights I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by notes, and wondered if my father had been right, if I was too scattered for this, if the whole company was one crisis away from realizing Grandma had been wrong. On those nights, I opened her notebooks. I did not read them like instructions. I read them like proof that a mind like mine had survived before. One page from 1974 became my favorite. Grandma had written about a banker who dismissed her proposal because she kept circling back to tenant behavior instead of profit projections. In the margin, she had written something I copied onto a card and taped beside my desk. "They think I am losing the thread. I am following 3 they cannot see." Some days, that was enough to keep going. On the anniversary of the gala, Margaret and I visited Grandma's grave. It was a clear morning, cold enough that the grass glittered. Margaret brought white roses. I brought one of Grandma's notebooks wrapped in cloth. Not to leave it there, just to show her, which I knew was sentimental and irrational and exactly the kind of thing my father would have called indulgent. I did it anyway. Margaret stood beside me, leaning on her cane. "She worried you would hate her for waiting," she said. "Waiting to tell me?" Margaret nodded. "She could have given you the shares outright. She could have told you everything before she died. But she believed if she did, your father would pressure you, your mother would guilt you, Vivian would question you, and you would hand pieces of it back just to make everyone stop hurting." I looked down at the stone. She was right, I know. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Grandma had doubted me, because she had known exactly how deeply I had been trained to surrender myself. "She also believed you would grow into it," Margaret said. "Not all at once, not dramatically, but honestly." I swallowed. "I hope I am." "You are." Margaret said it simply, without performance. That made me believe it more. Before we left, I placed my hand on the top of the headstone. "Thank you," I whispered. It felt too small. But sometimes the truest words are small because anything larger tries too hard. This is not the ending where I become perfect. I did not wake up one morning cured of self-doubt. I did not suddenly become the woman who always knows what to say. I still sometimes freeze when someone challenges me too sharply. I still sometimes need to leave noisy rooms and breathe in the hallway. I still sometimes look at my maps and wonder whether anyone else would call them chaos if they did not already. No, they had worked before. But I no longer mistake those things for proof that I do not belong. That is the difference. My family spent years treating my ADHD like a flaw they were generous enough to tolerate. Grandma treated it like a language. Now I do too. If there is one thing I would tell anyone who grew up being mislabeled by the people who were supposed to know them best, it is this. You're allowed to stop answering to names that were never yours. The difficult one, the dramatic one, the scattered one, the slow one, the quiet one, the one who cannot handle it. Sometimes those labels are not descriptions, sometimes they're locks. And sometimes the first act of freedom is refusing to turn the key from the inside. My father thought leadership meant being the loudest person in the room. My sister thought it meant being the most impressive. My mother thought it meant never embarrassing the family. My grandmother knew better. Leadership is not volume. It is attention. It is responsibility. It is the willingness to notice what everyone else benefits from ignoring. For years, I sat in rooms where powerful people mistook my silence for absence. They were wrong. I was there. I was listening. I was learning where the pressure gathered, where the stories cracked, where the people without microphones were trying to warn us. And when the moment finally came, I did not need to become someone else to claim my place. I only needed to trust that the way I saw the world had value before anyone else admitted it. That was my real inheritance. Not the shares, not the board seat, not the office with my grandmother's view of the city. The real inheritance was the understanding that I had never been empty. I had never been useless. I had never been too quiet to lead. I had only been surrounded by people who were too loud to listen. And now, when I walk into a boardroom, I still pause before I speak. I still look down at my notes. I still trace the lines between things other people think are separate. But nobody laughs anymore. They wait. And when I finally look up, the room listens.